Hello and welcome back to another episode in the series where I am filling out and constructing the Feywild to be a more playable realm for a D&D party. I am currently running the Wild Beyond the Witchlight for my players, which is an enclosed Feywild space for those of you who are familiar with it, but I want to maybe have a part 2 or a totally different Feywild campaign where they can just openly explore the realm. This week we're going to talk about the Lachey, an immortal Feywild race, but first I want to touch on the idea of the week, where I just tell you about an idea that was left in the last week or two, if I missed like last week, that I thought I had a good idea. The comments I wanted to highlight this week was from the user Joshua Hosmer, and he commented on my Baba Yaga video and said that in his campaign, she is a deity of hard medicine. He mentioned her mortar and pestle and also the silver birch and how it's used to treat horrible things like kidney infections. So he's done a lot of research that I haven't, because I don't know much about the silver birch. But how cool of an idea to have Baba Yaga be not just a hag and the mother of witches and this evil creature, but also a deity of medicine. And we talked about her being, evil and bad, but someone who can also create good. And I think that would be a really cool dichotomy to include there. I was making sure I used the word dichotomy right. You ever doubt yourself? Thank you, Joshua, for that comment. There were a bunch of other comments as well that I want to thank you guys for that were just, you have a bunch of good ideas. And if you, too, want to potentially be Idea of the Week, comment below on this video your idea for the Feywild or D&D in general. The last week or two, I started my last semester of grad school. I'm about to finish up my Master of English because I'm like super smart or whatever. And I am taking a class where we were reading Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. In Jane Eyre, Mr. Rochester sees Jane as this sort of mystical fairy, someone who might be a trickster or out to get him somehow, but he also calls her his kind fairy because he finds her just so strange and different. In traditional literature, fairies are seen as these mystical, inscrutable, sometimes tricky characters. And while the Feywild in D&D has that chaos and has that sort of dangerous edge to it, it's also a game of rules. So the Feywild in D&D can be full of whimsy and danger, but what about that hard-edged, terrifying, inscrutable, absolutely incomprehensible part of the Feywild, the part that scares people on the mortal plane? Does a party in the Feywild just get used to it? May I recommend the Lachey? A brief description of the Lachey. They're going to look like sort of albino elves. Their ears won't be quite as pointy as elves, maybe a little bit shorter, and instead of red eyes like albino people or animals would have, they're just completely black, including the whites of the eyes. None of that's there, just black. The Lachey are considered immortal. They will not die of natural causes. In fact, they might be a creator race. Maybe elves descended from them. It's hard to say for sure, but they can be killed. Technically, they contain some pretty intense magic. For instance, if they think of a weapon, it can suddenly just exist. They can look at a creature and have instantly charmed it. And the weapons, by the way, are seen as an extension of the Lachey's body, brought about by their pure essence. Let's say a Lachey comes across a creature that speaks a different language than it. After only hearing a few words, the Lachey suddenly just understands that language. All of this is, of course, very intense and a bit overpowered, but the Lachey were designed so that they don't really enter combat or get involved in other affairs. They're generally difficult to come across. They are said to maybe live in communities, but far off in like unreachable realms. Basically, they just stay out of things. They have intense power, a lot of HP. I've included a 3.5 edition character sheet I found, and it's insane. If I remember correctly, there's like over 800 HP. But luckily, they just mind their own business. They're basically gods. So how do you include something like this in a campaign? Here's a little more information. I'm going to read a quote from one of my sources about how the Lachey reached this realm. And by the way, anything that I used during my research, I have linked below. Their story is fairly consistent with those times it's been shared. They claim to come from a reality that was struck by an unimaginably great catastrophe, something that destroyed its very fabric across all planes and dimensions, something that struck perhaps at time itself. So great was it that all they knew was torn asunder, erased as though it never was. These beings are great and powerful, but they're not supposed to be here. They're, in a way, lost, just like many creatures in the Feywild. They're also very concerned with manners and behaving in respectable and proper ways. And they're always looking for something new, something interesting. If you existed from the beginning of time, you'd probably get bored. Here are my thoughts, and I do encourage you to leave your own below as to how you think you would incorporate a being like this. So, one example I'm using, and by the way, this is a spoiler for my campaign, so if you're one of my party members, you shouldn't be here. But also, I like the views, so maybe just like mute me for the rest of the video. Love you. In the first session of our Feywild campaign, I actually included a Lachey. One of our characters during his introduction came across one who wanted to tell him a story, and the story was a bit cryptic, and if he recalls it he can roll a wisdom save to remember it once a day. And if he can recall it and certain information, it might help during their campaign and piece some things together, but it wasn't like a guide to how to succeed. I also made this Lachey a child, because in my head I thought, well, they don't normally get involved, but what if this young being was just entertaining herself, decided at random to see what would happen if she just told the story, decided she just wanted to tell a story. I made her behavior a bit inscrutable, but this being to me was both entertaining herself and also aware that a great evil existed in the world, and while they would not traditionally reach out and get involved, I thought this would be an interesting way for her to interact. I'm also tying it into a grander campaign if they do a part 2, so what they're taking care of right now wouldn't be like a big enough deal for Lachey to get involved. But if it was on a much larger scale, it had something to do with like the major archfey or the whole of the Feywild, then it would be relevant and maybe she would be interested in protecting the realm. It would be a step out. But I don't know, I like it. Obviously I haven't totally made up my mind, and it also kind of doesn't matter because chaos. That's my out for this one. It's kombucha and I choked, and so like pure vinegar. Just imagine for a moment that you're an immortal being. You'd probably get bored. You'd probably want to see if there was anything new for the world to show you. Maybe you would be full of wisdom and want to help guide others. Maybe you'd get tired of that and just want to mess with people sometimes. The Lachey are the perfect inscrutable being for you to just utilize. They can't be killed unless your party's at an insanely high level. And, you know, maybe you make a great BBG if you're going to like a level 20 campaign. I don't know much about that. I don't have a ton of specific ideas because you could kind of utilize them anywhere. Maybe at Twilight on the material plane, your party comes across a mysterious being that wants to play a game or tell a story or give them weird advice that somehow has to do with what they know and then just disappears. Maybe it charms them instantly and tries to lead them astray somewhere and, you know, add a little blip in the road. Just because the Lachey don't normally get involved at all doesn't mean they shouldn't. I mean, this is D&D. Your party wants to feel special, like they're doing something big. Tell me your ideas. I feel like there's just so much you could do with them, but only sparingly. So what do you think is the best way to utilize Lachey in your campaign? That's what I have for you this week. Next week, I'm either going to talk about Fomorians or other folklore from different cultures, or some Feywild landscapes, because I've had some requests for that. I haven't decided. We'll see where the week goes. But I hope you got something from this week's video. I have a whole series on the Feywild by now that I've been building up, so check those out if you want to learn a bit more, and I hope this was helpful. So with that, have a great whatever it is, and I will see you next time. Subscribe. That's what I forgot to say. Bye.